They say the true heart of disco beats with a Philly rhythm. It's an undisputed fact that the sound of the four-on-the-floor bass drum, perfected by a master like Earl Young, laid the foundation for an entire era of global dance music. And when you speak of Philly soul royalty, the names Gamble and Huff rise up like monuments. But sometimes, the light that guides the king's path is not the star in the sky, but the small, uncredited lamp shining in the shadows. This is the story of two men, John Whitehead and Gene McFadden, the architects who quietly kept the lights on at Philadelphia International Records while the world celebrated their biggest stars. Their collaboration earned them 22 gold records, 2 platinum albums, and 2 Grammy nominations, yet they were barely mentioned. This is the raw truth about the cost of that success, a relentless fight for respect and publishing rights, a story of 2 miraculous brushes with death, and 1 ultimate, heartbreaking act of violence on a Philadelphia street. How much does a man have to sacrifice to finally sing his own anthem of triumph? This is the legacy of McFadden and Whitehead, and the untold power behind the mantra that carried a generation, "Ain't no stopping us now." The story begins in Philadelphia, where rhythm wasn't just in the clubs, it was in the heartbeat of the community. On June 10, 1948, John Whitehead was born, known affectionately by his family as Toodles, or Two for short. His mother recalled waking him up at night just to make him dance, sensing the born leader energy that the school principal would later recognize. Music wasn't a hobby for John, it was instinct. He imitated Elvis Presley, drawing children to him like a magnet, even at a young age. His lifelong partner in rhythm, Gene McFadden, had been with him since they were 3 years old. By the time they reached high school around age 15, the two friends, along with John's cousin Ron O'Leary, Alan Beatty, and Lloyd Parks, formalized their ambition. They formed a singing group they called the Epsilons. They generated a local buzz, performing all around Philly. In 1966, fate intervened, not with a high note, but with a horrifying twist of providence. The group went to a show where Otis Redding was performing. A local figure named Georgie Woods introduced them to Redding, and the connection was immediate. Otis Redding loved their sound, especially Gene McFadden, who reminded him of a younger version of himself. Otis quickly signed the Epsilons to Stax Records to serve as his background group. This was their golden ticket. They began touring the world with the undisputed King of Soul. That same year, while touring, they were scheduled to appear on American Bandstand. However, they found out they didn't have to perform and canceled their flight home. That flight, the one the Epsilons canceled, ended up crashing, killing over 200 passengers. They were spared by a single schedule change. Tragedy, however, seemed to follow their trajectory. On December 10, 1967, Otis Redding and his band members died in a devastating plane crash into Lake Monona in Madison, Wisconsin. The only survivor was Ben Cauley. John Whitehead and the Epsilons were supposed to be on that same plane with Otis, but they had left California earlier that day for Christmas. 2 times, the Grim Reaper had touched down and, by sheer miracle, passed over them. The loss of Otis Redding was heavy, both personally and professionally. Otis had wanted them to record a song called Sweet Soul Music. They were simply too tired and exhausted from non-stop touring to record it. The song ultimately went to Arthur Conley and became a worldwide hit. The Epsilons released one single on Stax called The Echo, but it didn't catch on. They returned home to Philly. The Epsilons broke up and reorganized as the talk of the town, releasing 2 unsuccessful singles. They signed with Gamble and Huff, who liked them but saw something else for their future. The group dissolved again, leaving John and Gene as the powerful duo we know. With the dream of singing fading, John Whitehead took a job in the mailroom at Philadelphia International Records, PR. This was the empire Gamble and Huff had just built, securing a distribution deal with Columbia Records, run by the legendary Clive Davis. John Whitehead and Gene McFadden refocused. If they couldn't sing their own songs, they would write for the stars. The transition from performer to creator was seamless. Their first song together was Backstabbers. John said the words came out of his personal experiences dealing with family and outsiders. They gave the track to Gamble and Huff, who decided it was a perfect fit for their new group, the OJs. Though Eddie Levert initially hated the song and wanted ballads, Gamble and Huff forced them to record it. Backstabbers hit number 1 on the Hot Soul Singles chart and number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It gave Philadelphia International Records its first gold plaque. Suddenly, John Whitehead and Gene McFadden were indispensable. They had arrived, not as singers, but as the engine room of the Philly soul sound. Hired as the official songwriters for Gamble and Huff, McFadden and Whitehead became the go-to-power duo for the entire label. They were no longer just men working in the mailroom, they were the architects behind the Philly soul sound, weaving complex narratives of betrayal, heartbreak, and resilience into music that soared across the charts. They crafted smash hits for nearly everyone on the roster and beyond, including James Brown, the Jacksons, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Teddy Pendergrass, Lou Rawls, and Stevie Wonder. Their songwriting and production prowess resulted in an astonishing catalog, 22 gold records and 2 platinum albums, all thanks to the sheer emotional depth and musical complexity they brought to the studio. One of their most enduring triumphs was "Wake Up Everybody" by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. John Whitehead described the writing process for this anthem as divine, feeling like God was telegraphed in what he wanted him to say. It was not a shallow dance tune, it was a powerful, crucial message that demanded attention, a tune that connected success with community values and social consciousness, a perfect example of black artistry delivering truth during a tumultuous time. But behind the facade of gold plaques and chart domination, a familiar, corrosive truth began to emerge. John Whitehead and Gene McFadden still longed to sing, to perform their own songs. They repeatedly pitched the idea of an album to Gamble and Huff. The response was always the same: refusal. They were told to stick to songwriting, that they would have a longer career and make more money as producers. But Kenny Gamble, specifically, wanted them to remain solely as songwriters, as he managed all the business for the label. The climate at Philadelphia International Records, PI, was beginning to sour. Kenny Gamble was dealing with personal stress, including the breakup of his marriage and an indictment for payola, the practice of paying DJs to play songs, a tactic that, while pervasive in the industry since the days of Leonard Chess, Morris Levy, and Bob Keane, seemed to be unfairly spotlighting the successful black-owned label. This pressure led to Kenny Gamble suffering a nervous breakdown, halting the label's operations for nearly 9 months. Many artists and staff began to leave. During this turmoil, McFadden and Whitehead started talking to other songwriters and musicians who revealed how much money they were earning from their work. It was a massive amount, far more than what the duo was receiving. The glaring problem was one of the most critical issues in the music business: publishing. They realized Gamble and Huff were taking the crucial songwriting credits, the publishing money, which represents the lion's share of long-term income. This realization sparked intense anger. McFadden and Whitehead felt cheated out of the money they were owed and began screaming and yelling and complaining around the PR building daily. Their success, built on 22 gold records, now felt like an elaborate trap, showcasing the systemic exploitation artists of color often faced, even within successful black-led companies. Finally, Gamble and Huff, in a move widely seen as an attempt to quiet their complaints, gave them the permission they craved. They could finally record and release their own album. The tension in the air at Philadelphia International Records was thick, fueled by the rage of John Whitehead and Gene McFadden over the hidden truth of their publishing rights. This explosive moment became the unlikely genesis of a timeless anthem. Given permission to record their own album, they stormed into the studio not just to make music, but to make a statement, a personal declaration against the very people who had tried to keep them in the shadows. They recorded "Ain't No Stopping Us Now" in a single take, making up the lyrics as they went along. The song was a direct, raw expression of their years of begging for an album, of feeling held down, and the ultimate triumph of breaking free. John Whitehead's vocals, coupled with the background harmonies of the Sweethearts, were nothing short of unbelievable. When they played the finished track for Gamble and Huff, the irony was thick. The label head still thought the song should go to the OJs. But the moment had arrived. In April 1979, the single "Ain't No Stopping Us Now" was released under the name McFadden and Whitehead. The song exploded onto the scene, validating their personal struggle on a global scale. It hit number 1 on the R&B singles chart, climbed to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, and soared into the top 10 on the disco charts. It became a double platinum success, selling over 2 million copies. This wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. Throw "Ain't No Stopping Us Now" on at any gathering, and watch the room erupt, especially among black audiences. It was immediately crowned the new black national anthem, a modern, empowering successor to "Lift Every Voice and Sing." It became the theme song for Philadelphia sports teams, the Eagles and the Phillies, and the entrance music for boxer Larry Holmes. The women were now going wild for the duo, Gene McFadden and John Whitehead, as their faces finally matched the unforgettable sound. They were nominated for a Grammy. Yet, even in this moment of glory, the shadow of fate persisted. On May 25, 1979, while doing promotion in Chicago, McFadden and Whitehead decided to do one last interview and rescheduled their flight to LA for the following day. The flight they were originally booked on, American Airlines Flight 191, crashed moments after takeoff, killing all 258 passengers and crew. For the second time in their career, the duo had miraculously cheated death, saved by the simplest decision: "Ain't No Stopping Us Now" was keeping them on the ground. Following this enormous success, they released a few more singles, like "I've Been Pushed Aside" and "I Heard It in a Love Song," but the raw, spontaneous magic was hard to recapture. By 1982, they decided to leave Philadelphia International Records and signed with Capitol Records. They collaborated with other stars like Gloria Gaynor and Freddie Jackson, but their albums failed to chart. The high-stakes life finally caught up with John Whitehead personally. After a period of separation from Gene McFadden, John was hit with the harsh reality of the music business's financial fallout. In 1984, he was forced to file for bankruptcy and face charges of tax evasion by the IRS for not filing taxes between 1975 and 1980. The man who wrote hits for the world's biggest stars was sentenced to 2 years in prison. While he served his time, his sons, Kenny and Johnny, the Whitehead brothers, found success with a deal back at par, a bittersweet continuation of the family legacy. Emerging from prison in the late 1980s, John Whitehead sought focus and transformation, converting to Islam. In 1988, he released the solo album, I Need Money Bad, a title that starkly reflected the reality of his life, a devastating counterpoint to the triumphant declarations of Ain't No Stopping Us Now. This disparity, the world-conquering artistry versus the devastating personal debt, is a painful, recurring theme in the history of Black American music. Throughout the following decade, McFadden and Whitehead continued to perform live globally on old-school tours, a testament to the enduring power of their sound. However, the shadow of misfortune remained fixed on John Whitehead. In July 2000, while he was on vacation, thieves broke into his house, holding his brother at gunpoint and stealing $60,000 in jewelry, including his Rolex watch, his safe, and all his suits. But the final, crippling blow came from the government he paid taxes to. In 2002, John was confronted with a massive $5.4 million tax lien from the IRS, covering back taxes, interest, and penalties spanning multiple years, 1975 to 1980, 1984, 1986, 1987, and 1990. They sought to seize his music royalties. John disputed the lien, claiming he only owed a fraction, $17,000, and that he had never received a default notice. Facing down a potential financial ruin, the creative spirit reawakened. John Whitehead began focusing on writing a book about his life, hoping to turn his incredible, dramatic journey into a movie. This was his final fight, a battle to secure his own narrative and legacy against a system that had, time and again, profited from his genius while neglecting his financial and legal security. On May 11, 2004, the fight ended. The man who had twice cheated the fate of plane crashes, who helped build the colossal empire of Philly soul, was murdered on the street outside his Philadelphia home. At approximately 5 p.m. on May 11, 2004, the story of John Whitehead's resilience was cut short. He and his friend, a mechanic named Ahmed Johnson whom John was mentoring, were working on John's SUV outside his Philadelphia home. Suddenly, shots rang out, and both men hit the ground. John's wife, Eleanor, a licensed nurse, rushed out, finding him on the ground with blood pouring from his neck. He never opened his eyes. John Whitehead was pronounced dead on the scene from a gunshot wound to the neck, at the age of 55. Ahmed Johnson survived, having been shot twice in the leg and butt. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Philly soul community. Gene McFadden, witnessing the aftermath, was visibly shaken and trembling. Investigators believe John Whitehead murder may not have been the intended target, rather, the shooters were aiming for Ahmed Johnson due to an earlier argument, tragically claiming the life of the music legend instead. The most profound tragedy of all is this: the John Whitehead murder remains unsolved to this day. The man who wrote the anthem Ain't No Stopping Us Now, who twice walked away from catastrophic plane crashes, was struck down in the place where he should have been safest. The loss was too heavy for his partner. The toll of the murder worsened Gene McFadden's already struggling health, and 2 years later, he died from liver and lung cancer at the age of 56. The legendary duo McFadden and Whitehead was gone. Their story is a powerful reflection of the struggle for dignity and ownership in black music history. They were recognized in 2017 with an induction into the Philadelphia Music Walk of Fame, ensuring their place among the Philly soul icons. But their true legacy is the song itself. You can still hear Ain't No Stopping Us now played at weddings, graduations, and protests, a reminder that no matter the obstacles, the spirit of perseverance is unconquerable. It is a vital piece of black history that should never disappear, unlike the studio that once housed Gamble and Huff's gold plaques. If this story reminds you of a time you had to fight for your own triumph, or if McFadden and Whitehead's music helped you keep going, write their names down in the comments below. Stream and download their music, and support the legacy of true Philly soul artists like John Whitehead's sons, the Whitehead brothers, and Gene McFadden Jr. We read every comment. And to anyone who's ever been pushed aside, remember the promise of that song.